Israel lives under an iron dome, a diplomatic iron dome provided by the United States. American taxpayers are paying for these bombs that are being dropped on Gaza and destroying it. So it makes more sense for people to be outraged.
One word is more potent and contested than any other when it comes to Israel's 21-month assault on Gaza. And that word is genocide. It's a word that draws fury from Israel's defenders, who complain it is unfair, exaggerated, and often anti-Semitic. But Israel's strongest critics say it's the only word that will do. Since the heinous Hamas attacks of October 7th, 2023, Israel has killed an estimated 58,000 Palestinians, including an estimated 17,000 children. The devastation speaks for itself. And earlier this month, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz laid out plans to corral Gazans into a camp on the ruins of Rafah. Even former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert said of that plan, quote, "It's a concentration camp, I'm sorry." American political debate about Gaza has tended overall to be broadly pro-Israel, but some dissenting voices can't be ignored. Earlier this week, an op-ed appeared in the New York Times. The author said it is, quote, "inescapable that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians." That author was born and raised in Israel, served in the IDF, and is now a professor of Holocaust and genocide studies at Brown University. His name is Omer Bartov, and I'm glad to be joined by him here today. Professor Bartov, you made the point in your New York Times column that you had concluded quite soon after Israel began striking back post-October 7th, you had decided that the Israelis were probably committing war crimes at that point, but you were slower to believe that they were engaged in genocide. What's the difference, and what convinced you that this is in fact a genocide?
So thanks for having me, first of all. There are three really relevant international crimes that we can think about in the context of Gaza and many other similar cases. One is war crimes, and war crimes obviously have to be carried out in war, and there are severe breaches of the rules, laws, and conventions of war. Then you have crimes against humanity, and crimes against humanity would be crimes against civilian populations, especially when large numbers of civilians, innocent civilians, are being killed. Genocide is a somewhat different charge. It's based on the Genocide Convention of 1948, and that convention speaks of genocide as acts committed with the intent to destroy a particular group in whole or in part as such. So unlike the other crimes, which are against individuals, in the case of genocide, the point is that people obviously are being killed or harmed in various ways, but that they are being harmed as members of a group, that the intent is to destroy the group, not simply individuals. And that you have to show both that there is an intent to do so and that that intent is being implemented. So it's a difficult international crime to prove, but it is one that has particular significance in the sense that it's different from the others because it's focused on the existence of a group rather than simply on the scale of the atrocity committed.
And you think that there is proof that the current Israeli government and its armed forces are engaged in that attempt to destroy the Palestinians as a group?
Yes, so the curious thing in the case of Gaza is that in many cases of genocide, the problem is to show intent because states, organizations carrying out genocide don't like to say that they are. They say that they're doing something else. And they don't like to write any orders to that extent, to leave any paper trail. In the case of Israel, immediately in the aftermath of the Hamas massacre, politicians and generals with executive authority made genocidal statements. The question then was, were these statements made in the heat of the moment, or were there actually instructions to carry something out? And that was the reason that I was slow to identify genocide. I wanted to know whether these statements were serious and not simply that people were outraged by the massacre by Hamas. And there was good reason to be outraged by that. Some 800 civilians were killed, a massacre. By the spring of 2024, by May, I concluded that there was no other way but to say that what the IDF was involved in was not simply an attempt to carry out what were supposed to be the war goals, which were to destroy Hamas and to release the hostages, but rather that it was engaged in a concerted, systematic attempt to make Gaza uninhabitable for its population, which is identified as Palestinian. About 75% of the population are Palestinians who themselves are descendants of refugees from the Nakba, from the expulsion of 1948. And the attempt was to destroy any possibility for that group to stay there, to live there, to sustain itself, and if it survived, to reconstitute itself as a social, cultural, and political entity. And that, as you said in the opening, is an ongoing attempt since then. And I have to say that since June, more or less, since June 2024, we can't actually talk about a war in Gaza. We use the term war because we don't want to call it something else, but there is no war against an organized military entity on the other side. So much of what the IDF is doing, with all kind of contractors helping it, is destruction. It's systematic destruction of everything.
I think in addition to all those points, it's important to quote the emotional heart of your piece. You say you've reached this inescapable conclusion, as you put it, that Israel is indeed committing genocide against the Palestinians. And you talk about your own personal background, and I alluded to that in the introduction. You were born and raised in Israel. You talk about growing up in a Zionist home. You served in the IDF. And so you add to the judgment of genocide, quote, "This was a painful conclusion to reach and one that I resisted as long as I could." Tell me a bit more about that sense of pain that you have about it.
Look, I mean, as you said, I spent the first half of my life in Israel. Most of my best friends live in Israel. I have family in Israel. My father was a strongly Zionist journalist and writer, a public person in Israel. I taught at the university there. It's a country that I call my home, although I've lived in this country now for some 35 years. To see the country engage in what it is engaged in, and to see the extent of denial that is going on there now with most Israeli citizens don't even want to watch the images from Gaza. Now, there are no broadcasts on Israeli TV. You won't know what is going on if you just watch the evening news on Israeli TV. But of course, you have access to other, social media and so forth. But people are in denial of that. To see the army that I served in behaving in ways that were unthinkable at the time, to the extent that a man that I knew when I was very young, and I've known for over 50 years, who later became chief of staff and minister of defense under Netanyahu, already in December of 2024 said that what the IDF was doing in northern Gaza was ethnic cleansing, and was attacked across the board in Israel by members of the opposition, not only the coalition, for having dared to say that, which is obviously what officers on the ground were telling him. So to see all of that, the indifference, the denial, is heartbreaking. And of course, as any human being, if you watch the images, if you think of 17,000 children killed, it's unfathomable. And I have to say, it's been very hard not only to say it, but to observe this going on day by day by day.
There are, of course, those who are outraged that the IDF or the government of Israel should be accused of such a thing. And one common thread to those denials is often the idea that critics are relying, as indeed I did in my introduction, on casualty figures from the Gaza Ministry of Health, which is run by Hamas. And therefore defenders of Israel say, well, those figures are unreliable or propagandistic and should not be relied upon for judgments of, say, genocide. What do you say to that?
Well, here's a sad fact that what has happened is that even the IDF is quoting figures by Hamas. It's not really by Hamas, it's by the health authorities that are under the control of Hamas. And they have been very conservative. So estimates by other experts are that the casualty count is actually much higher, that it's by now over 100,000. But what is tragic is that we have learned that we cannot believe the figures that the IDF is providing. One clear indication of that is that whenever some killing of civilians is reported widely, the IDF says that it's going to investigate it. And it says we operate according to international law and so forth. And then nothing happens. You don't see anyone being tried. You don't see any punishment whatsoever. And so the sense is that the IDF is actually cannot be trusted for what it says, whereas the figures coming out of Gaza, which are the only figures, including those cited by Israeli officials, are quite accurate and seem to be relatively conservative.
I want to ask you about US media coverage as well, because this relates to another argument levelled by the most staunch defenders of Israel. The argument is basically that Israel is criticised for conduct that is ignored or downplayed when other nations do it. And related to that, there's an argument that raising the charge of genocide against Israel is itself anti-Semitic. But you offer a very strong rebuttal to that idea in your New York Times piece, which I want to quote. You say the people who make that argument seem to believe that, quote, showing images of Palestinian children ripped apart by US-made bombs launched by Israeli pilots is an anti-Semitic act, unquote. Do you think that kind of argument from Israel's defenders has impacted American media coverage and the broader American debate about Israel's conduct in a damaging way?
Well, I think what we've seen is the use of anti-Semitism, or allegations of anti-Semitism, being used to deny what we can objectively observe, and being used, as happened primarily last spring, also to silence any criticism of Israeli policies. This has a long history, of course. This didn't begin on October 7th. Israel, for a long time, has been arguing that any criticism of the country is anti-Semitic. And of course, that's nonsense. Many of the students who were protesting during last spring were Jewish students, and they were protesting against what they saw. Now, it has to be understood, of course, there are many other countries that are involved in war crimes, maybe in genocide, in ethnic cleansing. Israel, however, is a country that is strongly supported by European countries and by the United States. You can say that in Syria, there were serious breaches of international law during the civil war there. Russia is obviously engaged in that. But those countries were not supplied by American arms. They were not given diplomatic cover by the United States. Israel lives under an iron dome, a diplomatic iron dome provided by the United States. American taxpayers are paying for these bombs that are being dropped on Gaza and destroying it. So it makes more sense for people to be outraged by the kind of policies that Israel is carrying out in Gaza with complete support of the United States, which has become, in truth, complicit in what is happening right now in Gaza.
Omer Bartov, thank you so much for a great conversation, and thank you for joining us here at The Hill.
Thank you very much.